today we are going to be talking about how to navigate difficult conversations with your clients. I'm Krista Kathleen, life coach and business mentor here, and I am interviewing Monika Hutchinson, she wears a lot of different roles in my life. So she is my business partner in our Fearless Public Speaking brand, but she also has her own brand and coaching business, Perfectly Imperfect Coaching, and she is a public speaking and real talk coach. And on Friday, she led the most amazing women's circle, a virtual women's circle that I got to be a part of. And it was all about having difficult conversations. And I was like, oh my gosh, this would be perfect to talk about with coaches. We have to have a lot of difficult conversations with our clients as different situations come up in the relationship. And Monika has this beautiful 3-step approach that I can't wait for her all to share with us, that it's going to make it so much easier to navigate these difficult conversations. With that being said, I want to switch it over to Monika so she can introduce herself a little bit better than maybe what I just did.
No, I think you did pretty great, Krista. I'm super happy to be here. Like Krista said, we work together on the Fearless Public Speaking brand. And then my brand, I feel like, is shifting and evolving, which I think is important to say. And Krista will tell you this too, especially in front of a bunch of coaches, that, I've been coaching in this position with my own company for about 1.5 years now, within different roles in corporate for a good 8 to 10 years. But real talk is kind of where my passion lies, and then public speaking I love as well. But I'm also looking at rebranding to the Edgy Empath. So that's another thing where it's going to be helping people, especially intuitives and empathic people, bring together their passions and figure out how to both, find a purpose and find meaning in their life, but also make money doing it. So I'm super excited to just pull all that together.
Yeah, we love that. And yeah, it's definitely okay to let your brand grow and change with you. Let that happen as need be. All right. So let's talk about what are some of the scary things of having to have these hard conversations and deal with them head on. For most of my life, I've been the person who, when conflict happens, I like to run the other way. As there's the fight and flight. Actually, I think, Monika, you said there's one more thing, right?
It's freeze. So there's fight is fight back, and then flight is I'm getting out of here, and then freeze is like I'm just like stifled by inaction. I'm not going to do anything. I might do the silent treatment. I'm not going to say anything. Maybe I put my earphones in and just don't listen to you. But yeah, fight, flight, or freeze. And those come from a super primitive place in our brain that thinks that we are still cavemen and cavewomen living, out in the middle of nowhere and having to protect ourselves from these awful threats in the wild. Our brain cannot distinguish the difference between a perceived threat and an actual physical threat. So this is why when we have these difficult conversations, we get really freaked out and we respond from a more primitive place of our mind.
For most of my life, and sometimes still do, I've lived in the space of freezing or flighting. Monika, what would you say? Which space do you feel like you naturally hang out in?
I'm a jack of all trades, master of none. When I'm really passionate about something, like the fight response kicks in hardcore. In my corporate job, I remember, especially when I was getting ready to leave, I felt very passionately about the fact that I had shaved half of my head and dyed my hair purple, and that I should still be able to be a trainer and be in that space and have that hair, because it wasn't in our dress code or anything, not be able to do that. Me and my boss got into it quite a bit, and he just couldn't acknowledge me and my feelings. And I was so pissed off that I just bit back all the time. Or when I feel like people are personally attacking me or people I care about, I've definitely been more of a fighter. Leaving the situation, not as much. Freezing, no. I'm definitely, actually, fight is probably my first response.
Good. Well, we balance each other out in that.
As always.
So we just want to acknowledge today that, first of all, it is scary. It's really scary to have these difficult conversations, but it's also really important to have them as well, because you are a business owner. You are the person's coach, and you don't want your clients walking all over you. You want them to respect you. You need to respect yourself. You need to treat your business like a real business. And what we found is that when you address these difficult situations head on from a place of respect and love for yourself and the other person, that there's really beautiful things that can happen. And some of those things are that you can actually create more trust and intimacy with the client, which, as we all know, that's everything with our coaching clients. If that's not there, it's really hard to move forward into the relationship. And that's actually with any type of relationship, personal or professional. When the trust is broken, there's like no foundation. So again, approaching these conversations from this place of love and respect can really help to improve that. And you can also help the clients to have some of their most greatest breakthroughs. I've experienced this in my own coaching business when I've seen clients show up in certain ways, and we'll talk about some of those different scenarios. You have to kind of see the bigger picture, that if they're showing up a certain way in your coaching relationship and on the coaching calls, they're probably doing this in other areas of their life. And this is where they need the tough love. They need someone to call them out. They need the higher gradiency of coaching. And again, that can sometimes make you really uncomfortable, but this is what people are paying you for. And so it can seem so annoying when you have to deal with some of these difficult issues, but really this is like the real coaching work has begun. Let's talk about what are some of those different type of situations that could come up, so you guys know what we're talking about. And all these situations that I'm going to list today are things that I have personally dealt with clients. So I'm not just like making these up out of nowhere. It's literally things that I've seen happen with my clients. And then Monika, if there's anything that we didn't cover and you're like, oh, actually, this has happened with some of my clients before, I'd love for you to jump in. But some of the different scenarios that can happen when you run a coaching business is your client wants a refund because they feel like the coaching isn't working, or the client isn't connecting with you, or maybe there was a change in their financial situation. That's never fun when you have to have the refund talk. Or you notice that a client is showing up consistently late to your calls. And I'm not talking like 1 or 2 minutes, I'm talking like 15 to 20 minutes late, right? Or they're canceling at the last minute, or they're not showing up to your scheduled calls at all. Another situation is your client's credit card payment didn't go through if they're on a monthly payment plan, and then you're reaching out to let them know and they're ghosting you. They're not getting back to you. Another situation is you notice that your client is consistently in breakdown on your calls. They're crying, they're stuck in this victimhood place. They are complaining, they're resistant. It's just like they're not even hearing or receiving what you're saying. And we would say that this is someone is not coachable. And then the last thing is a client sometimes can say something that's rude or offensive to you as they're, going through their things and stuff is coming up. So those are some different scenarios. So Monika, I'd love for you now to come in and talk about your 3-step approach, and then we can use that and tailor that to some of those more individual situations that I just talked about.
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to say that when it comes to these conversations, the reason a conversation is difficult when you're approaching it is because you care. If you didn't give a shit, like, you wouldn't care, and it wouldn't matter how you handled it. So the fact that, maybe you get that feeling in the pit of your stomach is a good sign, because it means that you actually care about the outcome. So that in mind, really this 3-step approach is very, very simple. And I've actually gotten feedback the past few days from multiple people I've taught this to who have been like, I used this and it felt really good and it was impactful. So I'm loving hearing that. Very simple. The first step is to acknowledge the person. Okay. And this is one that in the Women's Circle on Friday, we actually really dug into because everyone has their own view of what acknowledgement or empathy looks like. And I want to tell you, empathy doesn't have to look like I'm sorry or I understand. In fact, I would encourage you to not use those words because we use them so often in our culture. They have become very trite and sometimes triggering. If you sit with someone in, I understand what you're going through, they may just dig into that and be like, no, you don't understand. So what I was sharing with the women Friday night is if you want to use I understand, you should only use it if you have been through a similar circumstance and you're willing to tell them about it. Now, the reason I say that is if you just say, I understand, I've gone through something similar, that's one part of it. But when we talk about establishing trust and intimacy, which, by the way, if you're an ICF certified coach or you're someone who's going to get ICF certified, that is one of the core competencies is establishing trust and intimacy with your clients. So very, very important. But doing that includes not only telling them, I understand, but also being able to say, here's something I went through that was similar. Now, I'm not saying the coaching call isn't about you, right? It's about your client. But this is one of those opportunities where you can say, like for me, I've gone through infertility treatments. If I have someone who comes to me and they're struggling to have a kid, I'm going to be able to say to them, yep, I definitely understand what you're going through. I actually went through 3 failed fertility treatments myself, so I completely get it. You can leave it as simple as that. It doesn't have to be super in depth, but being able to do that takes the edge off of it a little bit and allows for a person to really connect to you and say, oh, holy crap, like you get it. So the first step is to acknowledge the person. And that could look like also, just saying, hey, I can tell that this is really difficult for you, or I can hear in your voice that this is bringing up a lot of stuff. Right? That completely equals acknowledgement. It does not have to be bleeding heart, but it's acknowledging them for something good or something that you hear within them and just noticing it and speaking it out loud.
Just so you all know, when someone comes to you with money issues, like it's a really sensitive topic for most people, and they're not doing it to make your life difficult, even though it can totally feel like that as a coach. You can feel like, man, you just have some days and you're like, does everyone just want to make my life 100 times harder? It's not about you. And it's really hard for people to admit, like, yeah, my financial situation changed, or I don't know if I can make my next payment, or just anything that they're coming to you with, that it can be very vulnerable. So like, again, if you, like Monika is saying, if you say like, hey, first of all, like, right, just pause for a moment. You don't have to dive into the issue right away. Pause for a moment and say, hey, I really appreciate you bringing this topic to me right now. I really appreciate you being transparent, or I appreciate you being honest and open about where you're at with your finances and wanting to have a conversation with me. Like when you start off with that, you have the person's attention and respect, and it's just going to soften, I feel like, anything you say after that. But if you skip this step, things can get messy and things can get hard. And so I agree. It's like everything starts with an acknowledgement, because most people in life want to be seen, heard, and acknowledged in a way they never have before. And that's what coaches can do for their clients. So I love this first step.
And it's like you said, Krista, it is one of those things that is often missed. I can't tell you how many times, like, I have tried to even tell other people, here's what would have been really helpful to me, this acknowledgement. It's simple, and it allows people to get off of that. So actually, I want to take that to the next step, because we talked about this on Friday as well. When you acknowledge someone, you don't want to just leave that statement there, because if you say, I really appreciate you coming to me with this money issue, that must have taken a lot of courage. That's where you're going to sit for a long time, right? They may want to talk more about that, and they may want to give you the whole story about everything financial that's going on. And that's going to be a challenge for you to dig your way out of too, because you may get sucked into that drama. So this is one of those things where the acknowledgement is followed by what you need to say to them. Okay. So if it is something like, hey, I really appreciate you coming to me with this payment issue. I know that money situations can be really sensitive. This is in the contract that you signed with me. I'm going to reframe that because I used a you statement and I don't like to use a you statement. This is what I do when I go off the cuff. My contracts do have a clause that state that I need to know 30 days in advance if a payment issue comes up. How can we work together to make this happen, or something to that effect? And I'm jumping the third step there. But so back to the statement itself is you don't want to use you statements. This should not be accusatory, because if you're accusatory, you totally crash this roller coaster that you just started going up, right? You build the acknowledgement, hey, thank you for telling me everything is good, blah, 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 and you did this thing that was wrong. That doesn't feel good for anyone. They know what they did. And shame is one of those awful things we all know, like Brene Brown, all the shame researchers, that shaming someone is one of the worst and most damaging things you could do to them, and also to your relationship with them as their coach. So that's going to erode, class I taught in corporate, we talked about like the Jenga tower. You place these trust deposits. There's an author who wrote that. I can't think of it at the time, but you make these trust deposits, like putting blocks back into a Jenga tower. But when you do something like put shame on them, you are pulling a bunch of blocks out, and that Jenga tower could topple over at any point in time.
So I had this written down from Friday. So basically step number 2 is you're going to provide the info you need to give them with I statements and refraining from using you statements, which is going to make the person become defensive and angry and retreat and try to protect themselves.
And 2 things about that. Number 1, make it specific. Number 2, it should be fact-based. Okay, this is not a time for like I feel, unless, and this is more, it might work more with your situation about like if someone said something rude or offensive to you. You still need to present it as a fact-based statement. So it's not a you made me feel this way. It's a when you said this thing, I felt this way. Right? That is okay, because that is still taking ownership for you didn't make me feel that way. And it also gives the person the opportunity to say, oh my God, I didn't intend that. That's not at all what I meant. When you tell someone you made me feel a certain way, you are taking away your own power and giving it to them and saying, I am powerless. Whatever you say, I'm going to absorb, which many of us are empaths, right? Some of us don't have the best protection mechanism, so it's really easy to suck all of that in. But using those I statements and saying like, when this happened, this was the result, that's actually a really good way to formulate it for any kind of, this is feedback giving really within this. So if you have to give them something like, when this happened, this is the result, or it's, here's the statement of fact. The payment was due on the 15th. It is now the 20th. I have a clause in my contract that states that there's a 3% interest charge for every day that you're late, and I was not contacted 30 days before, which is also in the contract, right? I'm not saying you did things wrong. I am owning, this is my contract. This is what I have here. This is my verbiage. And then we move on to step 3 from there.
Yeah, and it's important to know, like, nobody can make you feel a certain way, right? Like you make yourself feel a certain way. And so again, this is like when I was saying, it's like, you're not giving your power away by that statement. We really do. And again, remember, this whole thing we're talking about today applies to your professional life and your personal life. So you don't ever want to like point a finger and say, you made me feel this way, because literally no one can make you feel any way. You decide that for yourself. And also, too, we want to make sure that you're really good at honoring your boundaries, and having a contract is huge and solid. And you'll know what to put in your contract after you get burned several times. And you're like, okay, I'm done dealing with that. I'm going to put that in the contract. And then it's so great because, like, yeah, you can refer back to it and provide this factual information and say, well, per the contract that you signed, it says, X, Y, and Z in here, and I need to honor my contract. Most people respect that and understand that and hear that. So yeah, is there anything you wanted to add for step 2 before we move on to step 3?
No, that's totally it. So step 3, we move into step 3, is to open it up for a discussion. This is often what's missed in many of these kind of difficult conversations. And I don't know if any of you have been in the corporate space where maybe a manager or something has come up to you and basically they've just said like, hey, you did this thing wrong. I need you to do this other thing, or I need you to do it differently. And maybe there's no room for discussion and you feel like shit afterwards. They're like, you mess this up, go fix it and do it this way. And you're like, I don't even understand what just happened. I feel completely disempowered. I feel disrespected. They don't care. This was one of the most powerful things I ever learned when I first became a manager and had to coach people. I had another manager that I reported to, and I had an employee who had made some errors in her work. And I was ready, like a lot of new managers are, to be like, wow, you messed up. Why did you do this? What's going on? And my manager was like, no, let me lead. I'm going to lead this. And she came in and she was like, hey, you know what? We've noticed that there have been a couple errors on these requests that have gone through. What's going on? Like, is everything okay? Can we support you in any different way? Let's talk about it. And I was like, why didn't I think about doing that? We take things so personally sometimes when other people make mistakes or when they do something that creates more work for us. And it gets really easy to just be like, oh, you messed up, go fix it. But there's so much value in opening it up for a conversation and being able to say to people exactly what we talked about. So if we go back to that example, it's, I really appreciate you bringing up this payment issue for me. I know that finances can be really personal and that took a lot of courage. Per my contract, you signed XYZ, here's what's in it. What can we do to work together to make sure that, this contract is still being honored? And that gives the opportunity for them to talk more. And another thing with this process is 3 steps is it's repeatable and you're going to keep doing it throughout. Okay. Because if they come back with another objection, it's rinse and repeat over and over and over. Acknowledge again, restate in some other way what you need to get back to, and then ask again for input.
Yeah. So again, just to emphasize what Monika's saying for step number 3 is we're going to invite them to be a part of the solution. So that way we're not putting all the responsibility on ourselves to figure it out. Remember, as coaches, we are all about honoring our clients as the experts in their lives and as very resourceful, intuitive, confident human beings. And so my coaches did this with me back in the day. And it really felt really good to have them say, basically, like, I want to co-create with you here. How can we figure this out together so that way we both get our needs met? And I was so impressed because I don't see a lot of people handling conflict that way. And this is why I'm so obsessed with the coaching world, because they're so amazing at communication and relationship and skills in this way. So yeah, again, and I remember, Monika, you saying at the women's circle, try to avoid yes or no questions. And as you all as coaches know, we try really hard to just avoid yes or no questions in general in a coaching session, because you'll get a closed end response and it doesn't continue on with the conversation. So Monika, can you give us an example of like what it would sound like to have a yes or no question versus like an open-ended question when you're inviting someone to be a part of the solution?
So in the payment situation, it might be something like, it could even be, are you open to having that discussion? Because in this situation, you don't want to know. And you're setting yourself up for a failure if you say, are you open to having that discussion? If they are really, really feeling ugly about money, they may say, no, I don't. I just want this to be done with. It doesn't mean you're not going to have the conversation, but it makes them feel kind of yucky when you have to be like, well, we need to talk about it anyway. Yes or no questions or questions like that, like, are you open to having the conversation, work really well on sales calls, which I learned from Krista. Like, are you open to digging into this more, especially when money objections come up? But when it's something that it's already under contract and something they've committed to, then it's more like, how can we talk, or how can we open up this conversation right now to, like Krista said, make sure that both of our needs are being met. And Chris and I, in our own partnership, have seen plenty of money issues come up. And what we've found half the time is it's easy to assume as a coach that people don't want to pay you when they come back with money issues. Like, they're trying to get out of it. And a lot of times they're not. We're in such a world of yes or no, black and white, that sometimes we don't even think about the fact that there could be an option to get creative and to still meet their obligation, but to have a little bit more flexibility. So there's always an opportunity.
Definitely. And so we've talked a lot about money situations. And one of the difficult conversations that I talked about earlier was if someone is not showing up to calls or showing up late to calls or rescheduling at the last minute. So I'll just take you guys through like a quick example of how to use the 3-step approach with that. First of all, I would recommend any issues that you have in the coaching relationship, don't use the client's call as a way to navigate that, because remember, they're paying and that's their session, and they need to bring what they want to talk about. So I would always recommend emailing or texting or however you communicate with the client and saying like, hey, are you available for a 10-minute phone conversation today? There's, something that I wanted to talk about. And then this way you're creating the container and setting aside specific time to specifically focus on this issue, and you're not using the client's session to do it. So that's a little trick that I learned that works really well. And then again, so using the 3-step approach, once you're on the phone with them, acknowledge them and say, hey, thank you so much for taking the time to get on the phone with me. I know you're really busy. I appreciate you showing up today. Again, so making them feel good, acknowledging them for being there. And then you would give the facts of, I noticed for the last month, you've been showing up to the calls like at least, 15 minutes late. And just so per my contract, usually what I need to be doing is after 10 minutes, I feel like I'm butchering this right now. In my contract, it says that I will wait for 10 minutes. And then if you don't show up after 10 minutes, we're going to have to reschedule the call. And I know I've been a little lax on that, but I really need to honor and abide by that. Again, right, you're not using those you statements. You're stating the facts here. You're not making things up. And then for the last thing is inviting them to be a part of the situation and saying, how can we, using that open-ended question, and how can we resolve this together?
I think you have to be prepared to repeat the process multiple times, because they're going to come back probably with their objections. They may just say, oh my God, I didn't even realize I'm always late, which you'll hear all the time from a lot of people. But you are establishing the boundaries for yourself, which is great. I wanted to point out also that Krista did use a you statement at the beginning, but that's okay when it is an action. Like we said, if it's a fact, like you have been 15 minutes late to the past 2 calls over the last month, right? Those are you statements that are okay because it's a fact. So if it is a fact-based thing, that's okay. You just don't want to use you a lot when you're talking about feelings, especially. And you want to use you sparingly as much as possible. So even if you can reframe it and actually lead with, in my contract, it states that after 15 minutes, I will be dropping the call, and I've noticed you've been. If you can lead with the I, it's actually going to allow for a little more flexibility and not feel as pointed as leading with the you. So that's my only piece of feedback.
And then the only other thing I wanted to address today before we close this out is if we bring this to like a personal situation. I mean, really, there's 3 types of situations we could talk about today. We can talk about like if you're in a corporate job or a service-based job and you need to navigate a difficult conversation like with your boss or a coworker. There's if you're running your business and you have clients like we focused on a majority of today, and you have contracts and everything. And then there's also your personal life as well. And again, this 3-step approach can apply to all of those situations. I just want to make sure we don't like leave anybody out here. So Monika, maybe really quick, how could we just quickly talk about a scenario that would maybe like something going on with your boss, and then maybe something going on like with your boyfriend or your husband?
When it's someone who's even more closely connected to you. So let's take like your boyfriend first. I don't know, Krista, what's something annoying Kyle does? He won't watch this.
No, he won't. Well, something that actually did just happen this weekend that is really frustrating, we need to have a conversation, is we just had our baby shower recently because I am 38 weeks pregnant, and I've asked him to do the thank you cards a million different times, and he has not done them yet. And it is really pissing me off.
Okay. So in that situation, it could look something like, babe, I love you, and I'm so happy we're having this baby together, and the baby shower was so much fun, and I so appreciate you being a part of it. It's really important to me that we get these thank you cards out to the people that were there, and it's important to me that I have your help with doing that. Is that something that we could talk about on how to make it happen, or maybe if there's been anything that's come up that's kept it from happening so far? So it's similar, the acknowledgement can go a little bit deeper, especially if it's someone you're really, really close to. I think it's important to just tap into that connection that you have with them to get them feeling good right away. Also, leaving out the words but or unfortunately. I know we talked about that last week too. That's the roller coaster ride. Like, yay, I love you, everything's good, but stop doing this thing. Okay. So if you can leave that out, and it can be a statement. People are like, well, what do I do that ties it together? You just take it out. I love you. Thank you for being there. It was awesome. I really want to get these cards out. And I know I asked for your help on that and they haven't gone out yet. What can we do to make this happen? And then just work together on it.
Beautiful. Simple, easy. I'm so ready to have this conversation.
Let me know how it goes. With your boss, actually with your boss, I think it's similar. And we were talking about that in the circle on Friday. There was someone who brought up a boss situation, and you got to tap into the type of person your boss is. This is true with anyone. What's important to them? If you have knowledge of what's important to them, like if you've had a situation where you have had a good connection with your boss, I'm going to take my own example with where me and my boss went wrong. I haven't actually thought through this, so this will be a little raw. But with my boss, he and I had a really good relationship before all the shit went down. So for me, it could have looked like, hey, I really value our relationship, and I can tell that things are strained right now. And it's so difficult because you're so important to me. I've learned so much from you. You're so smart, blah, 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 pump the ego. I just need some acknowledgement right now that like, this isn't going to hold me back for the rest of my career. Is this something that we can figure out moving forward? It really does boil down to, again, like making that connection, stating what the need is, and then from there, figuring out how can we have a conversation about it. And I have 2 comments that we talked about last Friday that are really, really important. Number 1, preparation. I know that not all difficult conversations you can prepare for, but most of the time, actually, within your business, you can, because like Krista said, you don't want to just jump in on the call. That is the thing, is being able to take a step back and breathe is huge. Reactive is not as impactful as being proactive. So taking the step out, thinking about it, talking to someone that's close to you, figuring it out, processing it, and then being able to set that space and have the conversation gives you the time to prepare. And that is so, so, so important. The second part of that is if you're worried about the response that you're going to get, dump it all down on a piece of paper ahead of time. What is every possible thing that you think that they could say? And then start thinking about, well, how would I respond? How would I bring it back to the 3 steps if someone came to me with that? I think we were talking to somebody last week about that too, with like well, what if they just totally ignore what I say? Well, it's okay to bring it back and be like, hey, you know what? I realize you want to talk about this other thing. I'd really like to resolve this situation first so that we can keep moving forward together and just move forward from there.
Yeah. So again, it's so important to, if you're feeling emotional, if you are feeling heated, charged, triggered, that is not a good time to approach this conversation. Especially,
take it from me. I've made that mistake so many times in the past.
I think we all have, especially if it's a business relationship. I mean, it's important for any of these scenarios, but like you have to be able to separate business from like prefer emotional feelings. And it's good to have feelings. It's okay to be mad. It's okay to be angry or triggered or whatever. We're not saying don't feel that, but take care of you first, right? Go calm down, go for a walk, go work out. Like Monika said, I'll have my clients do this a lot of times, like brain dump on a piece of paper, write the person a letter that you're not going to plan on sending them ahead of time, and get all the mean stuff out there, all the you statements out there. And then when you're in this more like empowered place of where you can think clearly and you can see the situation from a different perspective, like that's when you're ready to have the conversation. So again, you really have to be able to, this is important. This really is important. I know this is at the end and maybe you're on information overload right now, but I think like if you take away anything we say from today is really make sure that when you have these important conversations, it really is coming from this place where it's processed and you feel prepared, and it's not messy and just all the feelings, because that's what you want to do on your own time, work through that or work through it with your coach. So.
Failure to plan is a plan to fail. It's so cliche, but it's so true.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing your 3-step approach. And again, just so you all know, you guys can use this in a corporate or service-based job. You can use this in your personal relationships, or you can use this in your coaching business with your clients when difficult situations will come up. And they will come up, just so you know. They will come up. I promise you that. So.
And if any of you have any conversations that you need to be having that you want to think through, like, drop them in the comments, and me and Krista can throw some feedback in there on what might be helpful.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching today. We're so appreciative of you and grateful for you, and enjoy the rest of your Monday.
Bye.
Bye.